Hey sweetheart, the janitor closet is down the hall. The laughter echoed through the concrete corridor of Building 7 just before sunrise, the kind of careless laughter that only existed inside places where people believed they knew exactly who mattered and who didn't. Four Navy SEAL recruits stood outside the intelligence wing in desert camouflage uniforms, coffee cups steaming in the cold Nevada morning air as they watched the woman pushing a gray maintenance cart toward the secured checkpoint. The fluorescent lights overhead cast pale reflections across the polished floor while red digital clocks on the walls blinked 5:12 in silent rhythm. The woman never looked up. She kept pushing the cart slowly, one gloved hand steady on the handle while the wheels rattled softly across the concrete seams. To the recruits, she looked forgettable. Early 30s maybe. White woman. Plain dark jacket. Faded utility pants. Blonde hair tied back beneath a navy cap. No visible rank. No military posture. Just another civilian contractor moving through the base before dawn while operators prepared for another classified briefing upstairs. "You lost, ma'am," another recruit called out with a grin. "Intel floors restricted. Unless the mops got top secret clearance now." More laughter followed. One of them nudged his buddy while pointing toward the long black tube strapped carefully along the side of her cart. "Maybe she's carrying blueprints for a new vacuum cleaner." The woman finally stopped near the security scanner. Calm blue eyes lifted toward the young men for less than a second before settling on the keypad beside the reinforced door. Her face stayed completely expressionless. Not angry. Not embarrassed. Worse. Uninterested. The oldest recruit among them leaned against the wall with crossed arms. His name tape read Mercer. Tall. Athletic. Mid-20s. The kind of confidence that came from surviving BUD/S and wanting the world to know it. "Ma'am," he said more firmly this time, "this hallway's off limits unless you've got level 5 clearance." The woman nodded once as if she had heard him the first time. Then she reached into her jacket pocket and calmly held a security badge beneath the scanner. The machine immediately flashed red. Access denied. One recruit smirked. Guess the mop lady took a wrong turn after all. The woman looked at the scanner for a long moment before quietly removing the badge. No frustration crossed her face. No panic either. She simply adjusted the black tube attached to her cart with careful precision, almost protective, and that was the first thing Ryan Mercer noticed that felt wrong. Nobody handled cleaning supplies like that. The tube itself looked military grade. Matte black. Titanium lock. No markings except for a tiny silver pentagon seal near the base that most civilians would never recognize. Mercer's smile faded slightly. "What exactly is in that case?" he asked. Before she could answer, one of the younger recruits stepped closer with the reckless confidence of someone trying to impress his teammates. "Probably trash bags," he joked, reaching for the tube. The woman moved instantly. Not violently. Not aggressively. But fast enough that the recruit froze. Her hand caught his wrist halfway through the motion with impossible precision, stopping him cold without spilling the coffee cup in her other hand. Silence hit the hallway all at once. The recruit blinked in confusion. Her grip wasn't painful. It didn't need to be. Something about the speed of it felt deeply wrong. Trained. Controlled. Deliberate. The woman slowly released his wrist and looked directly at him for the first time. "Don't touch classified material," she said quietly. Then somewhere deep inside the building, alarms suddenly began to ring. The alarm spread through Building 7 in sharp electronic pulses while red emergency lights flickered across the hallway walls. Every relaxed expression vanished from the recruits' faces instantly. Coffee cups hit the floor. Conversations stopped. Somewhere upstairs, heavy security doors began sealing automatically with deep metallic thuds that echoed through the intelligence wing. Ryan Mercer turned toward the nearest wall monitor as lines of warning text flashed across the screen. Priority signal lost. Satellite uplink failure. Active team status unknown. What is going on? One recruit muttered under his breath. Another already had his radio in hand, trying unsuccessfully to contact the operations floor. The woman beside the maintenance cart remained perfectly still through all of it. No surprise crossed her face. No confusion. If anything, the alarms seemed expected. Ryan noticed her eyes drifting upward toward the security cameras mounted in each corner of the corridor, quietly studying the timing of the lockdown sequence as if she had seen the procedure before. "Everybody move," a voice shouted from deeper inside the building as armed security personnel rushed past the hallway intersection. The recruits immediately stepped aside, suddenly aware that this was no drill. One security officer glanced briefly toward the woman and her cart before continuing forward without a word. Ryan caught that detail immediately. Civilian contractors were normally escorted out during a lockdown. Nobody had even questioned her presence. The younger recruit whose wrist she had stopped earlier rubbed his arm uneasily. "Who are you?" he asked quietly this time, without the confidence from before. The woman ignored the question. Instead, she calmly crouched beside the cart and adjusted one of the wheels that had become slightly crooked from the sudden movement around her. Even kneeling, she carried herself differently than any civilian Ryan had ever met. Balanced posture. Controlled breathing. Constant awareness of exits and angles. Every movement efficient. Nothing wasted. Ryan had spent years around operators. He knew instinctively when somebody had training. "You military?" he asked carefully. She stood again, pulling the cart upright with one smooth motion. "Not anymore," she answered. Her voice remained calm and level, but something about the response bothered him. Not anymore could mean retirement. Or it could mean something else entirely. The overhead speakers crackled to life. "All tactical personnel report immediately to Command Room 3. Repeat. All tactical personnel report immediately." Boots thundered through nearby corridors as intelligence officers and SEAL instructors moved quickly toward the operations center upstairs. The recruits looked at each other uncertainly before following orders. Ryan hesitated. His eyes drifted again toward the black classified tube attached to the maintenance cart. Pentagon seal. Biometric lock. The woman noticed him looking at it. "You recognize the seal," she said quietly. It was not a question. Ryan crossed his arms. "My father worked defense intelligence for 18 years. For the first time, the woman studied him with actual interest. Only for a second. Then it vanished again beneath that unreadable expression. "Then your father probably taught you not to touch things you do not understand." Before Ryan could answer, another alarm tone echoed through the hallway, deeper and more urgent than before. Every digital screen suddenly switched to the same image. A grainy satellite photograph of a mountain range somewhere in the Middle East appeared across every monitor with one line of text beneath it. "Contact lost with recon team Orion. Estimated window remaining, 43 minutes. Ryan felt the tension hit the hallway immediately. Orion was not a training unit. Everybody inside Building 7 knew that name. The woman stared at the screen silently while the reflected satellite image flickered across her pale blue eyes. Then very softly, almost to herself, she said, "They are already too far north." Ryan turned sharply toward her. "What did you say?" The woman reached for the black tube on her cart and slowly wrapped her hand around the titanium lock. "I said," she answered calmly, "your team is walking into the wrong valley." Ryan Mercer stared at the woman beside the maintenance cart while the emergency lights continued pulsing across the hallway ceiling. For a moment, nobody spoke. The recruits exchanged uncertain glances, suddenly aware that whatever this situation was, it had moved far beyond early morning jokes and hallway arrogance. The satellite image still glowed across every monitor in the corridor. Jagged mountains. White snowcaps. Black valleys cutting through the terrain like scars. Contact lost with Recon Team Orion remained frozen beneath the image in sharp red letters. How would you know that? Ryan finally asked. The woman did not answer immediately. Instead, she walked calmly toward the nearest wall display, pushing the cart with one hand while alarms echoed throughout the building. Security personnel rushed past behind her, but nobody stopped her. That detail bothered Ryan more than anything else. In a facility like Building 7, everybody got stopped. Everybody got questioned. Yet somehow this woman carrying a classified tube moved through the lockdown untouched. She stopped in front of the monitor and studied the mountain image quietly. Because they always choose the northern pass, she said at last. It looks faster on satellite imaging. One recruit frowned. What does that even mean? The woman tilted her head slightly while examining the terrain. It means satellite maps do not show snow depth beneath overhangs. It means radio signals bounce incorrectly off narrow canyon walls. It means extraction helicopters lose visual clearance after 0700 because the eastern ridge blocks the morning sun. Ryan felt something tighten in his chest. Those were not guesses. That sounded like someone who had operated there before. One of the recruits laughed nervously. Okay, hold on. You are seriously standing here pretending you know more than actual SEAL teams? The woman finally looked at him directly. Her expression never changed. I know exactly how many teams never came back from those mountains. Silence followed instantly. The recruit looked away first. Ryan stepped closer now, lowering his voice. Who are you? Before she could answer, two armed security officers emerged from the stairwell at the end of the corridor. Command Room 3 is sealed, one announced sharply. Only authorized tactical personnel beyond this point. The recruits immediately straightened. Ryan reached for his badge automatically. The security officer scanned it quickly and nodded. Then his eyes shifted toward the woman and the maintenance cart beside her. For half a second, Ryan expected the entire situation to end right there. Instead, the officer's expression changed completely. He stood straighter. Ma'am, he said quietly. The recruits noticed it immediately. So did Ryan. Respect. Not confusion. Not suspicion. Respect. The woman gave a small nod but said nothing. The second officer glanced uneasily toward the black classified tube. They are waiting upstairs. Ryan looked between them in disbelief. Wait, he interrupted. You know her. Neither officer answered him. The hallway speakers crackled again. Priority update. Team Orion beacon signal has moved east 3 miles off projected route. The woman closed her eyes briefly, almost disappointed. Too late, she whispered. Then she reached into her jacket and removed a thin black glove from her right hand. Ryan noticed the faint scars across her knuckles. Old scars. Precise ones. Not accidental. Her bare hand settled against the titanium lock on the classified tube. A soft electronic tone echoed through the hallway. Access request accepted. Every recruit froze. The Pentagon seal on the side of the tube illuminated in cold white light while hidden biometric scanners activated across its surface. Ryan heard one of the security officers quietly inhale beside him. That is impossible, a recruit muttered under his breath. The woman slowly lifted the tube from the cart and looked directly at Ryan Mercer. No, she said calmly. What is happening in those mountains right now is impossible. Then the reinforced doors to Command Room 3 began to open. The reinforced doors of Command Room 3 slid open with a deep mechanical hiss, revealing a wall of blue tactical light and controlled chaos inside. Voices overlapped across the operations center while satellite feeds flashed rapidly across massive digital screens mounted along the far wall. Uniformed intelligence officers moved between workstations carrying tablets and classified folders while radio chatter filled the air with clipped military urgency. At the center of the room, a giant digital map displayed the same mountain range from the hallway monitors, only now dozens of blinking markers tracked possible movement routes through narrow valleys covered in snow and rock. Ryan Mercer stepped inside behind the woman and immediately felt every eye in the room shift toward them. Or more accurately, toward her. The reaction was subtle but undeniable. Several analysts straightened the moment they saw the black classified tube in her hands. One lieutenant actually stopped mid-sentence. Another officer quietly lowered his voice while watching her move across the room. Yet nobody greeted her. Nobody announced her arrival. It was as if the entire operations center recognized something important without understanding how to react to it. The woman pushed the maintenance cart toward an empty corner beside the wall and calmly removed her navy cap. Long blonde hair fell loosely to her shoulders before she tied it back again with quick practiced movements. Ryan noticed the room watching her carefully now. Not casually. Carefully. "Where is Commander Hayes?" one analyst asked from across the room. "On secure communication with CENTCOM," another replied. "Orion Beacon is still drifting east." A low curse came from one of the tactical officers near the central display. "That route is suicide after sunrise." The woman looked toward the map immediately. "Not suicide," she said quietly. "Just predictable." Ryan watched several nearby officers glance toward her with visible irritation. One major turned sharply. "Excuse me." The woman walked toward the digital map without hesitation. "Your thermal overlays are delayed by 20 minutes, she explained calmly. "Those heat signatures are not current positions anymore." The major crossed his arms. "And you know this because?" She ignored the tone completely. "Because snow retains heat differently along rock formations after 0500. Their system is reading the terrain incorrectly." A few officers exchanged skeptical looks. Ryan felt the same reaction himself. Everything she said sounded impossibly specific. But nobody had thrown her out yet either. That part still made no sense. The woman stepped closer to the glowing map wall and studied the eastern ridge in silence. Then she pointed toward a narrow canyon marked in yellow. "That is where the signal disappeared first." An intelligence analyst frowned. "Correct." Her finger shifted slightly north. "And that is where they rerouted." The analyst blinked. "How did you know that?" The woman did not answer. Instead, she looked around the operations center slowly, scanning screens, timestamps, wind reports, helicopter routes, and live weather data with frightening speed. Ryan noticed her eyes moving constantly, collecting details faster than anybody else in the room. She was not reacting emotionally to the crisis. She was dissecting it. A young communications officer suddenly stood from his console. "Signal spike detected," he announced. Every conversation in the room stopped instantly. "Team Orion emergency beacon just transmitted for 4 seconds." The room went silent as coordinates appeared on the main display. Several officers immediately began talking over each other, calculating routes and extraction times. Then the woman spoke again. "That is not a distress signal." Her voice was calm enough to cut through the noise without effort. Commander Hayes finally emerged from a secured glass office overlooking the operations floor. Tall. Gray-haired. Decorated combat veteran. The room immediately straightened at his presence. His eyes locked onto the woman beside the map, and for the first time since Ryan had entered Building 7 that morning, he saw a genuine surprise cross someone's face. Hayes stopped walking entirely. "Claire," he said quietly. The operations center fell completely silent. The woman turned toward him with the same unreadable expression she had carried since sunrise. "Your team has less than 30 minutes, she said. "And if you send helicopters into Echo Valley, you are going to lose those too." Commander Hayes walked down from the elevated glass office without taking his eyes off Claire Donovan. The entire operations center watched him carefully now, sensing a shift none of them fully understood yet. Ryan Mercer noticed something unsettling immediately. Hayes was one of the most respected commanders in Building 7, a man known for absolute control under pressure, but the moment he saw Claire standing beside the tactical map, his expression changed in a way Ryan had never seen before. Not fear. Not confusion. Recognition. Real recognition. "I thought you were in Virginia," Hayes said quietly as he approached her. Claire folded her arms calmly beside the glowing map wall. "I was." Hayes glanced at the black classified tube in her hand, then toward the satellite display showing Team Orion's last known signal. "Who authorized this?" Claire looked directly at him. "Nobody." Before Hayes could respond, another analyst spoke urgently from across the room. "Commander, we just received updated weather data from the ridge line. Wind conditions are worsening faster than expected." A second officer stepped forward holding a tablet. "Rescue helicopters can still make the southern approach if they leave within the next 12 minutes. Claire shook her head immediately. "No," the room turned toward her again. One of the senior tactical officers looked visibly irritated now. "With all due respect, ma'am, we are trying to recover a lost recon team before weather conditions collapse the entire valley." Claire stepped toward the main display. "And if you fly into Echo Valley right now, your helicopters will lose thermal visibility the second they cross the eastern ridge." The officer frowned. "That is not what our data says." Claire's eyes moved across the screen rapidly. "Your data is using surface temperature readings from 30 minutes ago." She pointed toward a narrow section of the canyon glowing faint orange on the display. "Cold air already dropped through the western pass. You can see it forming here." Several analysts leaned closer to their monitors. One of them suddenly froze. "Wait." Fingers moved rapidly across keyboards. New overlays appeared across the digital terrain map. The room grew quieter with every passing second. "She is right," the analyst whispered. "Temperature collapse already started." Another officer looked up sharply. "How did she catch that before our system did?" Nobody answered. Ryan stood near the rear wall watching Claire carefully now. Earlier that morning he had laughed when she pushed a maintenance cart into the hallway. Now highly trained intelligence analysts were recalculating mission data based entirely on her observations. And somehow that still did not feel like the biggest secret in the room. Commander Hayes rubbed a hand across his jaw while studying the updated map. "If we cannot use Echo Valley, then Orion has no extraction corridor." Claire slowly placed the classified tube onto the central operations table. "Yes, they do." Every eye followed her movements as she unlocked the titanium seal completely. Hidden electronic panels unfolded silently along the sides of the tube while blue security lights illuminated across its surface. Ryan heard somebody quietly curse under their breath. This was not ordinary classified equipment. The tube expanded into a compact tactical projection system unlike anything he had seen before. Claire pressed her palm against the biometric scanner. Access level Omega verified. The room lights dimmed automatically. A three-dimensional terrain projection suddenly rose above the operations table, displaying an entirely different version of the mountain range than the one currently shown on military satellites. Hidden paths appeared beneath the terrain overlays. Underground tunnel systems. Thermal blind spots. Narrow extraction corridors running through the mountains like veins beneath stone. The entire operations center fell silent. One intelligence officer stared at the projection in disbelief. "What is this?" Claire's face remained calm in the pale blue light of the holographic map. "The real terrain." Commander Hayes looked at her carefully. "You built this system?" Claire shook her head once. "No." Then she looked directly at the frozen image of Team Orion's last signal blinking deep inside the mountains. "I survived it." No one in Command Room 3 spoke after Claire Donovan's final words. The holographic terrain continued rotating slowly above the operations table, casting pale blue light across stunned faces throughout the room. Hidden pathways cut beneath the mountain range like invisible arteries, revealing routes that did not exist on any standard military map. Ryan Mercer stared at the projection in disbelief. He had spent years training around classified systems, but he had never seen anything like this before. More disturbing was the silence from everyone else. The analysts were not questioning whether the map was real anymore. They were questioning how they had never known it existed. Commander Hayes stepped closer to the glowing terrain display. The Oracle system was shut down 9 years ago, he said quietly. Claire's eyes remained fixed on the blinking signal marker representing Team Orion. The public version was. One intelligence officer looked up sharply. Public version. Hayes exhaled slowly, already realizing he was losing control of the room. Oracle was a classified navigation initiative designed after multiple special operations teams disappeared in high-altitude terrain during the early years of the war. Ryan frowned. I have never heard of it. Hayes looked at him briefly. You were not supposed to. Claire reached toward the holographic map and rotated the terrain with 2 fingers. Entire sections of mountain pathways shifted into view. Standard satellite imaging failed in those regions because the terrain changed too quickly, she explained calmly. Snow movement, tunnel collapses, thermal distortion, false elevations. Teams were navigating blind. One recruit near the rear of the room whispered under his breath, Jesus. Claire ignored him. Oracle was built to map what satellites could not see. Ryan looked toward her carefully now. You said you survived it. For the first time all morning, Claire hesitated. The room noticed immediately. 9 years ago, she said quietly, a joint reconnaissance unit entered those mountains during a winter extraction operation. Her eyes drifted toward the frozen Team Orion beacon again. Same valleys. Same weather conditions. Same assumptions. Nobody interrupted her. The mission lasted 71 hours before communications collapsed. The operations center had become completely silent now except for the low electronic hum of the projection system. Claire's voice never changed emotionally. If anything, that made the story feel heavier. Rescue teams kept searching the wrong routes because the satellite maps showed open terrain where the mountains had already shifted. She touched the holographic display again. Several hidden avalanche zones illuminated red beneath the surface. The real paths were underground. Ryan felt a chill move through the room. How many people were on that mission? Claire answered without looking at him. 12. The silence afterward seemed to stretch forever. One analyst slowly lowered his headset. Another officer stopped typing entirely. Commander Hayes folded his arms tightly. Claire was the terrain analyst assigned to Oracle before the program vanished. Ryan blinked. Analyst? Hayes looked directly at him. Field analyst. That single word changed the atmosphere immediately. Ryan finally understood why she moved like an operator instead of a civilian. Why she scanned exits instinctively. Why highly trained tactical officers had started listening the second she spoke. Claire had not studied these mountains from behind a desk. She had walked through them. An urgent voice suddenly broke across the operations center speakers. New beacon transmission detected. Every screen instantly updated. The blinking signal representing Team Orion had moved again. Only this time the beacon sat directly beside a narrow underground route highlighted in blue by Claire's system. One analyst stared in disbelief. That tunnel is not on any military map. Claire stepped toward the display immediately. Because it was buried after the second collapse. Commander Hayes looked at her sharply. Can it still be used? Claire studied the terrain for several tense seconds. Then finally she nodded once. Yes. Ryan watched the room shift around her in real time. Earlier that morning she had been the woman everyone laughed at in the hallway. Now experienced commanders waited for her answer before making decisions. One communications officer swallowed nervously. If Team Orion found that tunnel, Claire finished the sentence quietly. Then they are still alive. The operations center exploded back into motion the moment Claire confirmed Team Orion might still be alive. Analysts rushed between consoles while updated route calculations spread across every monitor in the room. The low hum of urgency returned immediately, but something fundamental had changed now. Nobody looked at Claire Donovan like a civilian anymore. Ryan Mercer noticed it in the smallest details. Officers moved aside when she walked past. Analysts waited for her confirmation before locking coordinates. Even Commander Hayes kept glancing toward her before issuing commands. Respect had arrived quietly, without announcement, and somehow that made it feel even more real. Claire stood beside the holographic terrain projection studying the underground corridor highlighted beneath the mountains. Her eyes tracked elevation markers, thermal blind zones, and structural collapse warnings with impossible speed. Ryan stepped closer carefully. "If they are alive," he asked, "why did the beacon stop moving?" Claire pointed toward a section of the tunnel glowing faint yellow beneath the terrain. "Because that section narrows to less than 4 feet wide." Ryan frowned. Meaning they cannot move quickly carrying equipment through there. One of the communications officers looked up from his headset. "Commander, weather conditions just worsened again. We are losing drone visibility across the eastern ridge." Hayes swore quietly under his breath. "How long before the tunnel collapses completely?" Every eye shifted toward Claire. She examined the projection for several tense seconds before answering. 30 minutes if the pressure system continues moving east." The room grew silent again. Ryan watched Hayes make a decision internally. "Prepare extraction teams," the commander ordered sharply. "Ground approach only. No helicopters." Several officers immediately began relaying commands. One younger tactical analyst hesitated before speaking. "Sir, with all respect, we are basing this entire rescue operation on data from a system that technically does not exist anymore." The room froze for half a second. Hayes slowly turned toward him. Before he could answer, Claire spoke first. "He is right." That caught everyone off guard. Claire folded her arms while the blue terrain light reflected across her face. Oracle was buried because too many people believed technology alone could replace field judgment. The analyst swallowed nervously but nodded slightly. Claire continued calmly. "The system was never the problem." Ryan noticed something shift in her expression for the first time all morning. Not weakness. Memory. People stopped listening to the operators who survived the terrain. Silence settled across the room again. Then suddenly one of the senior intelligence officers near the rear console stood up so quickly his chair rolled backward. "Commander," he said carefully, "I just pulled archived personnel records connected to the original Oracle mission." Hayes looked annoyed. "Now is not the time." "Sir. I think it is." The officer rotated his monitor toward the room. Ryan stepped closer instinctively. A black and white military photograph filled the screen. 12 people stood in winter tactical gear against a backdrop of snow-covered mountains. Their faces looked younger. Harder. More exhausted. Ryan immediately recognized Claire standing near the center of the image, though her hair was shorter then and her expression colder somehow. But what shocked the room was not the photo itself. It was the text beneath it. Classified JSOC Pathfinder Unit. Oracle Recon Division. Status, terminated. One recruit whispered under his breath, "Pathfinder." Ryan felt his stomach tighten. Every operator in Building 7 knew that name. Pathfinder units were legends inside special operations circles. Small covert teams trained to enter impossible terrain before anyone else, mapping extraction corridors for military operations nobody publicly acknowledged. Most people believed those units had been dissolved years ago. Hayes looked toward the officer sharply. "Who authorized access to those files?" The officer hesitated. She did. Every eye turned back toward Claire. The holographic map continued glowing between them while silence filled the operations center once more. Ryan stared at the woman everyone had laughed at less than 2 hours earlier. Maintenance cart. Navy cap. Cleaning gloves. None of it had been real. Claire looked at the old photograph quietly before speaking in the same calm voice she had carried all morning. I was not the analyst. Ryan frowned slightly. Claire's pale blue eyes lifted toward the room. I led the team. The room stayed silent for several seconds after Claire Donovan revealed she had led the original Pathfinder unit. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The holographic terrain rotated slowly above the operations table while the blue light reflected across stunned faces throughout Command Room 3. Ryan Mercer could almost feel the shift happening around him. Earlier that morning, the recruits had laughed when Claire pushed a maintenance cart through the hallway. Now hardened military officers looked at her the way soldiers look at people whose names survive long after missions end. Commander Hayes finally broke the silence. Team Orion entered the mountains 12 hours ago using standard satellite routes. Claire nodded once. Which means they already lost visibility before dawn. Hayes stepped closer to the projection table. Can you get them out? Claire studied the terrain carefully before answering. Yes. One word. Calm. Certain. The room immediately came alive again. Bring up live terrain feeds, Hayes ordered. Ground teams prepare for immediate movement. Analysts rushed across the operations floor while communication officers relayed updated extraction plans through secure channels. Ryan stayed near Claire, watching the way she worked. There was no panic in her movements. No dramatic speeches. She simply processed information faster than everyone else in the room combined. Claire rotated the terrain projection toward the northern ridge. The tunnel Team Orion entered connects to an abandoned Soviet weather station here. A hidden structure illuminated beneath the mountains. One analyst frowned. That facility collapsed decades ago. Claire shook her head. Partially. She pointed toward a narrow section of the underground route. The western chamber still exists because the support beams were reinforced after the avalanche season of 1986. Ryan stared at her. How do you know that? Claire answered without looking up. Because I slept there for 4 nights during the second Pathfinder deployment. Another officer stepped forward holding updated weather reports. Pressure system is accelerating. Ground visibility expected to drop below 20 feet within 15 minutes. Claire's eyes narrowed slightly. Then they need to move now. She touched the holographic map again, highlighting a winding route beneath the mountains. Transmit these coordinates directly to Orion. A communications officer hesitated. We cannot establish stable contact. Claire looked toward him calmly. You do not need stable contact. You need timing. The officer blinked. Claire pointed toward the terrain display again. The mountains create a 6-second radio opening every time the eastern wind shifts against the ridge wall. Ryan frowned. You can predict that? Claire finally looked at him directly. You learn to listen differently when mountains decide whether people live or disappear. The room fell quiet again for half a second before another analyst suddenly shouted from his console. Signal detected. Every monitor flashed at once. A weak beacon pulsed across the operations screens. Team Orion. Alive. The communications officer adjusted his headset quickly. We only have a narrow connection. Claire stepped beside him immediately. Patch me through. Hayes looked surprised. You are going to talk to them yourself? Claire never took her eyes off the blinking signal. They will recognize my voice. Static crackled through the operations center speakers before a weak transmission finally emerged beneath layers of interference. Exhausted breathing. Distant wind. Then a strained male voice. This is Orion Lead. We are trapped beneath the western shelf. Visibility gone. Tunnel unstable. Ryan watched the room freeze around the sound of the transmission. Claire leaned toward the microphone calmly. Orion lead, this is Claire Donovan. Silence answered her for one long second. Then suddenly the exhausted voice changed completely. Oracle. Several people in the room exchanged stunned looks. Claire's expression never moved. Listen carefully, she said. You are 70 yards from an old weather station support corridor. You are going to move east for exactly 40 seconds, then turn north when the tunnel narrows. The voice on the radio sounded almost disbelieving. How do you know that route still exists? Claire stared quietly at the rotating terrain display above the table. Because I built it. The operations center stood completely still as Claire Donovan guided Team Orion through the collapsing mountain tunnel from thousands of miles away. Every person in Command Room 3 listened to her voice moving calmly through the static-filled speakers while the holographic terrain rotated above the operations table like a living blueprint only she truly understood. 10 more yards, Claire said quietly into the microphone. You are approaching a steel support arch buried beneath the ice layer. Stay low when the tunnel narrows. Static crackled again before Orion lead answered through heavy breathing. We found it. Several officers in the room exchanged relieved looks immediately. Ryan Mercer stayed near the rear wall watching Claire carefully. There was something surreal about the moment. The same woman they had mistaken for a janitor that morning was now directing one of the most critical rescue operations Building 7 had faced in years. And she was doing it without raising her voice once. An analyst suddenly looked up from his monitor. Thermal signatures detected. Every screen updated simultaneously. 6 heat markers appeared moving slowly through the underground corridor beneath the mountains. Team Orion. Alive. The operations center erupted into motion again. Communications officers relayed extraction timing while tactical teams prepared ground recovery units near the border region. But through all the noise, Claire remained completely focused on the terrain display. The next chamber opens toward the southern ridge, she continued calmly over the radio. You will feel warmer air before you see daylight. Orion lead answered immediately this time. How are you predicting this? Ryan noticed the faintest change in Claire's expression. Not pride. Memory. Because we carved those ventilation routes by hand after the second collapse. Silence followed her words. Several younger recruits exchanged stunned looks. The legend surrounding Pathfinder teams suddenly felt very real inside that room. A communications officer lifted a hand sharply. External rescue convoy confirms visual contact with Orion. Relief spread visibly across the operations center. One analyst actually leaned back in his chair and laughed quietly from exhaustion. Commander Hayes closed his eyes briefly before exhaling. Thank God. Static filled the speakers again before Orion lead's voice returned one final time. This time stronger. Clearer. Oracle, he said quietly, they told us your unit disappeared. Claire stared at the glowing terrain projection for a long moment before answering. Most of it did. The radio fell silent after that. Team Orion's heat signatures continued moving steadily toward the extraction point while recovery teams closed the remaining distance outside the mountains. Around the room, officers began shutting down emergency protocols one by one. The crisis was ending. But Ryan Mercer could not stop thinking about the hallway earlier that morning. The jokes. The laughter. The maintenance cart. He looked toward Claire standing alone beside the holographic map while the rest of the room slowly returned to normal operations. She still wore the same dark jacket. The same simple clothes. Nothing about her appearance explained who she really was. Ryan finally walked toward her carefully. Why did you come in dressed like that? He asked quietly. Claire looked at him for a second before reaching toward the projection system. The holographic mountains slowly faded into darkness as she powered Oracle down. Because invisible people hear the truth faster than important ones do. Ryan lowered his eyes slightly, embarrassed by the memory of their first interaction. About earlier, he started quietly, we did not know who you were. Claire secured the black classified tube with calm practiced movements. That was never the problem. Ryan frowned slightly. Claire looked toward the operations floor where officers now spoke about her with respect instead of suspicion. People usually decide what someone is worth before they ever listen to them. The room grew quiet again as Commander Hayes approached from behind. For a brief moment, the decorated commander simply stood there looking at Claire Donovan. Then, without a single word, he came to full attention and saluted her. Every conversation in the operations center stopped instantly. Ryan Mercer watched the entire room straighten almost automatically after that. Analysts. Officers. SEAL recruits. Nobody laughed anymore. Claire returned the salute calmly before placing the classified tube beneath her arm and walking toward the exit. The automatic doors opened quietly ahead of her while the first light of sunrise spilled across the hallway outside Building 7. And for the first time that morning, everyone inside the room finally understood who had really been standing beside them all along.